It's the Metro on WDET, live from the Mackinac Policy Conference. I'm Robyn, Vincent. How much has politics changed in the last 20 years? That was a different time for sure. A time before President Trump and MAGA, before the wealth gap continued expanding, before we were as polarized as we are today. It was also before artificial intelligence and algorithmic media had taken hold. But how different were things, really? What can we learn from that era of politics? And what are the things that we should be happy we've left behind? Jennifer Granholm was the governor of Michigan from 2003 to 2011. She was also the energy secretary under the Biden administration. She's here on Mackinac and will be speaking at this year's policy conference. So we invited her to discuss how politics has changed and the lessons she's learned from a long career in politics. Secretary Granholm, welcome to the Metro.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
So before we dive into the past, I want to start with today. There is a big race for Michigan's Senate seat between Democratic candidates Abdul El-Sayed, Mallory McMorrow, and Haley Stevens. You just endorsed Stevens, the most moderate of the candidates. Why?
Well, I've known Haley Stevens since she was working in the Treasury Department and helped to rescue the auto industry. When I was governor, that was when it was during the Great Recession. The auto industry was on its knees. It was going into bankruptcy. And without the support of the federal government, there is no way we would have a vibrant auto industry today. So I worked with her very closely as governor, and I was so taken by her because she's so smart. She knew what to do. She was so devoted to Michigan. She was in D.C., but she was like the voice of Michigan to save the auto industry, along with Steve Ratner, who was also orchestrating this the auto rescue. So I got to know her way back then. And then when I was secretary, I was really so pleased that she was so effective at persuasion in Congress. She was an instrumental voice in passing some key pieces of legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so I've just really loved her for so long and really appreciated her effectiveness. In fact, I think she was recently identified as the most effective congressperson in Michigan by an outside organization that evaluates how effective members of Congress are. So anyway, all of those reasons, I have nothing against the others. Everybody's a friend, but I really, really think she would serve Michigan very well. Okay,
so you have a lot of experience working with her. You know her work on an intimate level. I will say, though, Congresswoman Stevens got a lot of boos at the Democratic nominating convention. I'm wondering, does it concern you that she's unpopular with the most liberal wing of the party?
Yeah, I think anybody who succeeds in this primary is going to have to pull together the party. I mean, some from the progressive wing, some from the moderate wing. Bottom line is, the party will have to come together around the nominee, and I certainly will support whoever that person is as well. But so she's got work to do, clearly, as do the others, and we'll see what happens in August.
What do you think the impacts would be of a Democrat winning this Senate race?
Well, I think it's so important to hold this race. I mean, first of all, you've got to have the ability to put a stop to the worst impulses of the Trump administration, and we're seeing in real time so many examples of that, whether it's corruption or the war or the tariff situation or costs. I mean, there's so many issues. So we need to have a Senate that has some teeth and some backbone. The thing about Haley Stevens is that she's got firm support in the African-American community. She's got firm support among seniors. She's positioned as the person who's most likely to win in the general election, other than there was one poll that was a bit of an outlier. But the bottom line is we just have to win the seat. The seat has to be held by by a Democrat. Otherwise, it's, we end up having a Senate that it kowtows to the president like we have seen over the past few years.
I mean, you're mentioning things that have been skyrocketing under the Trump administration, such as the cost of living, and then we think about the war in Iran, and we think about tariffs. And yet, as unpopular as President Trump is right now for these things, by some polls, Democrats are even less popular. And so I've been asking Democrats here about this. Please, you've got something to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Democratic Party has a lot of work to do as well. But if you ask in the generic ballot, would people prefer a Democrat or Republican? Right now, Democrats are winning. So it's really going to come down to who the individual is in all of these races across the country. Democrats have been outperforming Republicans by, in many places, 10, 11, 12 points in all of these races. And the Republicans continue to nominate extreme MAGA people. I mean, if you look at what just happened yesterday in Texas, Ken Paxton is an extremist, and he's got a huge amount of corruption issues, personal issues, and yet he's on the ballot, which gives, I think, the Democratic nominee, a guy named James Tallarico, a shot at actually winning the Senate in Texas.
So you're sensing a bit of a shift right now for Democrats.
I am.
You were part of the former President Joe Biden cabinet as the energy secretary. At that time, Democrats really struggled to maintain their popularity. Why do you think that is?
Well, I do think that post-COVID and the inflation that ensued really was an anvil around the administration. And although we were trying everything, open up supply chains, et cetera, really trying to get ships into the ports, all of that, it takes a while for inflation to come down. Now, it did come down. It was at 9% when, right after COVID, and then it was brought down to about 3%. But it takes a long time for that. So that clearly had a problem. I think the president's age clearly created a problem, as we all saw with that debate, even though I will say that as a cabinet member, that debate was a shock to us on the cabinet. That was not the Joe Biden.
When President Biden was struggling to be coherent, to find his words.
Yes, it was not the Joe Biden that we saw in cabinet meetings or in meetings in his office. We were all scratching our head going, what happened? But nonetheless, that was the impression that people got, and I think that obviously had an impact on the party overall.
Right. I mean, that's simply impossible to recover from.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, many argue that the Democrats lost the presidential election because then President Joe Biden was unpopular. He didn't step down soon enough. He didn't make way for someone else to run. I want to listen to you defending Biden before he stepped down in July of 2024 on Off the Record.
He is on it. It's so, for all of us cabinet members, it's so frustrating to hear all of this talk as though he doesn't have it together when, in fact, he does.
Secretary Granholm, do you regret pushing for a Biden second term knowing what we know today?
Well, I certainly supported him. I supported whatever the decision was. In retrospect, it's easy to say that he should have stepped down sooner and that there should have been a primary, et cetera. I think hindsight certainly is 2020. We would have been in a better position. But we are where we are.
Why do you think Democrats lost in 2024 in the presidential election?
Yeah, I think that there was not enough time to rally around. I think Kamala Harris is an amazing candidate, and I was surprised, as many others were, that she ended up losing. But there just wasn't enough runway for her to be able to make the case. I do think that we needed to have a really strong platform on affordability, which, as everybody says, you shouldn't even be using affordability as a word. On the cost that people are paying to live their lives, we needed to have a really aggressive platform on that. Now you're seeing Democrats now really talking about that, and that's exciting because there are there's a sense, I think, that Democrats are listening to what people are really feeling on the ground, whether it's gas prices or the cost of energy. I mean, you name it, all the way around. So I'm encouraged by the shift in focus on the part of the Democratic Party. I would say, it was a mistake not to answer that ad that was such a killer ad on trans, on she's
the
for they,
anti-trans.
them, I'm for you, that kind of. There was no response to it. And I think you can't let charges go unanswered.
So for you, it is about the Democrats changing messaging. It was perhaps too focused on protecting democracy when it should have been focused on what's your daily life like and how do we make that better. But you think it also was about Democrats rolling up their sleeves and running some harder defense.
I think it's all of that. You gotta walk and chew gum at the same time. I do think that costs for people have to be number one, but democracy and saving democracy is really important too, as well as making sure that, I like to say you like to play 2 parts offense to 1 part defense, but you can't let the defense just fall off the table. You won't win the game. So you have to do both.
I hate to admit this, but, as you bring up Kamala Harris, something that it makes me think about is whether America is actually ready to elect a woman. And I have the honor right now of sitting here with a woman who led the state of Michigan for many years. I wonder what you think about that sentiment.
I'm innately a cup half full person. I'm an optimist. I do worry that in my lifetime we may not see that. And I find it such a, it's just a travesty, honestly. There's so many great executives, so many women who are out there running things, doing things, and the notion that one's plumbing might have an impact on whether you're elected or not is just really illogical in so many ways. But I think that we aren't likely to see a woman president in the next go-around, but that doesn't mean we won't. And so I think we must continue to try to pick the best talent forward, regardless of their gender.
We've been talking a lot about politics becoming more polarized. I mean, we've mentioned it a little bit so far, you and I, but I talk about it all the time on this show as well. And of course, this has me thinking about the Michigan legislature and Congress and these pressing issues of our time. Climate change is accelerating along with AI. How different are our politics today in Michigan versus when you were governor of the state between 2003 and 2011?
Robyn, I think things have gotten more intensely polarized, but it was polarized when I was governor, believe me. I mean, we had the Tea Party at that point. There was, there were protests. I mean, it wasn't like everything was kumbaya. There's always tension, there's always contrast, and there's always passion. So I don't, it may be different in kind in that people are so much more siloed right now, right? Their information streams are coming algorithmically so specific to them, and so they may not see the bigger picture in the arguments. And unless you know somebody who can explain, the various nuances, then you're going to be stuck reading in the internet swamps, trolling with people who believe like you do. And I think that causes all sorts of extreme reactions, like violence. I mean, the increase in violence right now, I think, is as a result of polarization like that and messaging that where somebody only sees with blinders. So that is different. But I think that polarization is, has always been there. There's always been, passion around it. But I do think it's been exacerbated by technology. I
mean, it always takes courage to run for office, and it always takes a special kind of person. But right now, just for me as an observer, as someone who studies the news and studies politics, this seems like a time that takes a whole lot of courage to step into the fray.
This is such an important observation, Robyn. I think that good people are choosing not to raise their hand because they're afraid. They're afraid of being doxxed. They're afraid of their families being hurt. You saw in Indianapolis, there was just a member of a city council in Indianapolis who voted in favor of a data center whose house was shot up, and with a note saying no, that's just an issue. That I worry that even for everyday, elected officials, from the very local level all the way to the most, the highest, that it is, you're correct that you have to have a lot of courage. And, I think it's up to all of us to help bring down the temperature so that we can have great folks who are representing us, who are not afraid that if they raise their hand, their families are going to be hurt. That is such a big difference. And it's such a travesty if we're losing out on talent because of fear.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest is Jennifer Granholm. She's the former governor of Michigan and former energy secretary under President Joe Biden. She's speaking at this year's Mackinac Policy Conference. Today, we're discussing how politics has changed since she was governor of Michigan and the lessons we can learn from that era. We'll be right back. It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest today is Jennifer Granholm. She is the former governor of Michigan and former energy secretary under President Joe Biden. She's speaking here at this year's Mackinac Policy Conference, where we're broadcasting live. And today we're discussing how politics have changed since she was governor of Michigan, the lessons we can learn from that era, and we will get to data centers as well, because I know, Secretary Granholm, you are speaking about the community benefits of them, which, of course, has us very intrigued here on the Metro. But first, I want to go back to your time as governor. I'm wondering, as we talk about polarization, as we talk about the toxicity of the moment, I realize that there was some of that back when you were governor and you had to set that aside. What were the things you had to compromise on to advance your agenda as governor in Michigan and to keep independent and conservative-leaning voters part of your coalition?
Yeah, this is such a great question. When I was governor, it was during the Great Recession. So Michigan was on its knees. And so we had to come together around a crisis. And so because of all of the bankruptcies in the auto industry, not just the OEMs, but the suppliers as well, Delphi went bankrupt before General Motors went bankrupt, et cetera. All of these suppliers had gone bankrupt. That created a crisis moment that required us to actually work together. And one of the things we worked together on, which was really hard, was not, because we lost so much revenue, tax revenue, with the loss of all of these job providers, we had to cut the budget. And we had to cut in Michigan a greater percentage of Michigan's budget than any state in the country. And it was not a time that we wanted to raise taxes to be able to make up that budget hole. So working together with Republicans to decide how we were going to make those cuts, it was so hard. We had to shut down government a couple of times. But nonetheless, we knew we had an end. We had to get there. We were agreeing that we couldn't raise taxes on people, but what we would cut would be different. So, for example, one of the things that we did early on was we presented the budget to the people. We went to every media market in the state, and I invited legislators from those regions to come to town halls where they had clickers, and they would answer questions. Where would you put your first dollar? Where would you make your first cut? Would you cut the arts? Or would you cut K through 12 education? People said, cut the arts. Would you cut higher education, or would you cut K through 12 education? People said, cut higher education. We just had to make these really horrible trade-offs all the way through. And because the legislators from that area, Republicans, Democrats, were in the audience, we basically saw these huge focus groups where we got our marching orders from people who are making the decisions on the road. It was one way to try to achieve consensus around what areas we had to cut and what areas we had to preserve no matter what. The two areas that people in Michigan said they wanted to preserve no matter what was health care for people. So don't cut Medicaid, don't slash mental health, et cetera, and K through 12 education.
Well, and that is interesting, of course, because your predecessor, John Engler, when it came to mental health, he's considered to have a terrible legacy. And so you listening to folks and hearing that, I'm wondering what that was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think people understood you have to, so, do you cut people off of health care? Vulnerable people, which is what Medicaid represents. Do you cut seniors off of nursing home care? And people in Michigan are compassionate. They understand that we've got to care for our people. So I was really grateful to hear their voices in that. I understand that previous administration also had difficult choices to make. Everybody's got difficult choices as they move through. We chose to do it in a slight different way so that we could have the buy-in and the input from Michigan citizens. But it's just one example of a crisis bringing together folks to do something you really don't want to do,
yeah.
but to be able to do that. On the plus side, because that's sort of playing defense for the state, on the positive side, everybody agreed that we should diversify Michigan's economy. We got to hold on to our auto industry, and we have to add new sectors so that we can have jobs for well into the future. We were losing people. The Great Recession accelerated that, et cetera. We had to, so the strategies to bolster the MEDC, for example, to be able to get economic clusters in here. It's one of the reasons why we chose to focus on clean energy in Michigan, to do batteries for electric vehicles, et cetera. And that thread has continued, obviously, throughout. That had bipartisan support as well, because we had to do something and shake it up. So, crisis provides a great opportunity for bipartisanship, I think.
Do you think that kind of effort today would have the same kind of bipartisan support?
I have no idea. I am so glad I'm not in Lansing working at this moment, because I do think it's tougher now because, as they say, people are encouraged to be extreme. And, they get rewarded by their supporters for being the more extreme. And, I'm more of a, one of those unpopular centrist Democrats, and I feel like you got to bring people together to get solution, and that compromise is not a terrible thing. That, if you get half a loaf, at least you have something to eat. If you don't have any loaf, you're going to go hungry. So when you compromise, you get something. So continue to move and to build on that. That's sort of my philosophy. I worry that that's not necessarily the case anymore, although I do think that Governor Whitmer has done just a fantastic job in bringing people together. And she has obviously a long history with the legislature and know the people, which I think is really important. That's sort of one thing that I did not have. I came in not having had the experience of being in the legislature. And so I was confounded by how obstructionist people seem to be in many cases, and really working. I had a huge amount to learn in bringing people along in that way, and was glad to be able to have, as a lieutenant governor, John Cherry, who had deep experience in the legislature, to be able to do some of this negotiation.
Well, Secretary Granholm, can I just say that it's refreshing to hear a leader say, I had a lot to learn. There was a lot. There was a steep learning curve for me.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you have any regrets during your time running the state? Things you wish you could do over? It sounds like your ability to bring people together that's a point of pride. What's something you think about and say, if only?
Oh my God. I wish at one state of the state, I stood up and I said, you're going to be blown away by Michigan's economic revitalization. And that you're going to be blown away came back to haunt me over and over again, because we continue to have struggles economically. So be careful what you say. My staff...
You spoke that into the universe.
I spoke it, but, my staff, actually, before I went on, my staff was like, oh, you maybe shouldn't say that. I'm like, no, we're going to be great. We're going to do this. And that was a bit of a reach. I'll just say that at that time. But anyway, you're talking about more than just words, of course.
Yeah,
But
if you're willing.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I made mistakes every single day. Every day, I'm sure. There were things I wish I could have had a do-over. But I think that, in life, when you make mistakes, it is such a great platform for improvement. So, what would I have done over? I don't know. I wish that we had more revenue to be able to support public education even more. I wish we had more revenue to be able to fully support higher education and not have to cut. I wish. But I had partners who also had a say in this. And so it's hard to say, I don't like to look at regrets other than to say, we got to learn, we got to move forward. And, we did the best that we could in the time that we had.
Well, before we move forward, I mean, I want to think about this time period that really was interesting while you were governor, because it was a time also when we were trying to work with China. Now we're trying to compete with China. We're very worried about them coming to dominate economically and to be able to build things much quicker than we do here in the U.S. What do you make of this turn from seeing China as a friend to seeing them as a foe? Does it concern you at all?
Well, I do think that we have to really have our guard up and recognize that China is beating us in a lot of ways. I mean, in the energy space, of course, where I come from, China is by far dominant in these clean energy technologies of the future. China is being referred to as the electro state, while we, the U.S., is being referred to as the petro state.
How does that feel for you as someone in the energy world?
Yeah, it's horrible. I mean, I feel like we have ceded all of this territory. For example, when the Trump administration takes away the support for electric vehicles, well, what it's saying is that China, go ahead, BYD is the biggest seller of electric vehicles globally. We're just going to hand it over to them. All of that technology advances that started in the United States now being commercialized and taken to scale in China. This is true with solar. It's true with wind. It's true with all of these technologies. So what kind of a strategy is that? That we don't even compete, that we've basically said, here, go ahead. It was going to be, the OEMs here were moving into the electric vehicle space while holding on to the internal combustion engine. They were going to compete. We were building all these factories, including for the batteries for electric vehicles, and now they've had to convert because this administration is not supportive of that technology. How can you beat China when you're giving away industrial sectors and allowing them to win? So we've got to get in the game. We've got to be serious about the competition and recognize that if we don't compete, we're bringing a knife to a gunfight globally.
It sounds like we have a lot to learn from China, would you say? I mean, when it comes to building high-speed rail, housing, EVs.
Now, clearly, China subsidizes their industries. So the question is, what's the industrial strategy that the United States needs to put into place? They have, 10-year plans, 5-year plans that really focus on this, and they focus intensely. We know that if you're going to be able to compete, you have to partner with industry. And so having industrial strategy, which, it used to be very laissez-faire, hands-off, we don't do that in this country. I think the Inflation Reduction Act showed that if you partner with industry, if you offer tax incentives to locate in the United States, that actually works because now you're leveling the playing field globally with China. So just as one example, just in my area in the energy space, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. It offered these tax credits for locating manufacturing in the United States. As a result, just in the 2.5 years since it was passed, by the end of 2025, there were 950 factories just doing energy products alone that announced they were coming or expanding in the United States. Millions of jobs. That was an industrial strategy that was working. Michigan got a huge amount of the grants to be able to lure these factories. And to take them away is just, it just makes no sense. Now, fortunately, I will say this, the Trump administration didn't take everything away. So there still is a tax credit for actually manufacturing. There is a tax credit for certain types of energy, like geothermal energy or nuclear energy or hydroelectric energy. They took away the tax credits for electric vehicles. They took away the consumer tax credits to be able to purchase electric vehicles. They took away the ability for solar and wind to have tax credits, which is really foolish in my view if you really want to be if you want to dominate the AI race even, because these hyperscalers, these big tech companies, they want to build out their AI facilities because they've got commitments to zero carbon energy. And if you can't use renewable energy plus batteries, then you're really shooting yourself in the foot from a federal policy that wants to win the AI race.
Okay, well, let's talk about that, what it means to dominate the AI race, because data centers, that is something you're talking about in just a couple hours. You're on a panel about the community benefits of them. This has been an issue that we have watched divide and unite people across the country. And what I mean by that is it is dividing them against big tech, and it is uniting people across the political spectrum in opposition to data centers. So you realize maybe here at the Mackinac Policy Conference, which is full of movers and shakers and folks that often are very close to some of these big companies, what you're saying might be more popular than it might be for those who are listening right now. So make the argument. What are the community benefits?
Well, first of all, I am not for unfettered data centers. You have to have guardrails. So if a data center comes to your area, there has to be a guarantee that everyday utility customers are not paying for the energy that data center is going to be using. You can't have the data center come in and have everyday customers pay for the utility upgrades to connect that data center to the grid. It's got to be on the tech company that does that. Similarly, the data center has to agree that when the grid is full, on the hottest days or on the coldest days, when your grid is at capacity, that they are flexible, that they dial back their use, or they bring in batteries to be able to be a grid asset and not a liability. Now, if you have guardrails like that, guardrails around the water use, making sure that you are replenishing the water, which is what, like, for example, Google has a commitment to replenish 120% of water that's used. All of that being said,
meaning
those are the guardrails.
They're taking contaminated water and purifying it.
Well, or purifying it, or reusing the water and bringing more water back. I mean, or using air cooling rather than water cooling.
So forgive me for jumping in here, but I want to make sure I'm hearing you right, Secretary Granholm. What you're saying essentially is that this is coming regardless. AI. The AI race is here. We are running it whether we want to be or not. And so you are saying that there must be greater participation from government. It must be more regulated.
Yes, there has to be more regulation.
Okay, I think everyone can be in agreement on that, on those regulations. Maybe not all of big tech, but a lot of people can agree on that. But what then do you see as the community benefits?
So this is where the community has some agency to be able to negotiate with a tech firm what they need. So, in Van Buren Township, Google gave, $20 million or some amount like that to be able to both weatherize homes in the area, to help with a park that Kevin McNamara, the township supervisor, wanted to see. There are benefits that a community can have. There's also, can you imagine if a data center comes in and decides that it's going to pay for people, everyday citizens, to have batteries in their home to make their own homes more resilient, but also connected to the grid, and that those people get paid by the utility if the utility uses the battery, if they agree, if they have to agree. So in many states, this is what's happening, is that you get solar and batteries for your home, and the utility is able to tap you if you agree and pays you for using that battery. It's like a virtual power plant where you cobble together all of these distributed batteries and they maybe get $150 a month, maybe a couple $1,000s a year, if they agree, to be able to not charge their car at the peak of, there's all sorts of ways to do it. So that could be a community benefit that a data center would help to pay for, to be able to get buy-in from the community.
You know what this has me thinking about, Secretary Granholm? I lived in Wyoming for some time, where the oil and gas energy supplemented education for residents there.
Right.
Do you think we should go down a path where revenue from AI data centers should be going to things like funding education?
Yeah, think about this. So in Loudoun County, Virginia, which is the place that is the most intense data center place, their property tax revenue increased 45% because they had these data centers come in. And they have been able to build new schools, they have been able to fund gymnasiums, science centers, and property tax has actually been reduced by 25% for everyday people. So there's a benefit there. Now you don't want to give away huge property tax abatements, because you will be able to do that. But you can give a sales tax abatement on the equipment that they might bring in to be able to lure that. And that's in fact what's happened here. And in Michigan, the sales tax exemption on the equipment that they would bring in is money that you would never have gotten anyway. And when the sales tax exemption kicks in fully, it means that the data center is committed to using 90% of their energy from clean sources and paying for that additional energy to come in to do that.
We're running out of time here, so I just want to end on this idea of people not feeling heard when we talk about the data centers, because something that has been circulating quite a bit are videos of people who are in the face of their local elected officials, and they're pleading with them, and they're saying, listen to us, we don't want this. And you see elected officials simply shaking their heads and saying, we're doing this, we're voting this way. What do you think that interaction should look like?
Yeah, I think communities should decide. They should decide with all of the facts. They should definitely, they have to. The people who are elected there have to listen to the folks who they serve, right? And the people who are there hopefully go in with a mindset of, how do we shape this in a way that benefits us and that doesn't just victimize us? And that's why people have agency. Communities have agency here. There's been a number of moratoriums passed for periods of time while people figure out what are the asks? What should it look like? How can we really benefit? So I think that's important, and I think that local supervisors, local township commissioners, local county commissioners have agency in this as because the people are demanding it. But the people should know that they can get a lot out of this if they craft it well.
Last question for you in the last minute that we have here, Secretary Granholm, because it is something that I know, again, is a point of pride for you, and that's bringing people together and building coalitions. What should Democrats be doing to create coalitions with people on the right?
I think that we all have to look at the things we agree on. We want to bring down costs, despite what the administration is doing with tariffs and gas prices and stuff, but we all agree we should be bringing down costs. What are the strategies we can come together where we know that will be effective? What are the strategies to make America excel in innovation? We all should be agreeing on that. There are basic, how can we make sure, it's been abysmal what our test scores have been in the country. It's been abysmal. What should we be doing about that? It's not acceptable that children are failing. We cannot stand by and allow that to happen. So there are categories of things that we should all agree on, and those are the things that should be top of mind.
Jennifer Granholm is the former governor of Michigan and former energy secretary under President Joe Biden. She's speaking today at Mackinac Policy Conference. Secretary Granholm, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Appreciate it, Robyn. Thank you so much.